So, Liam, a question a lot of Chelsea supporters have been asking is why now for the sanctions to be imposed when obviously it was first mentioned in Parliament a couple of weeks ago and then again last week by Keir Starmer. From what Dom's saying there, is it because the government wanted to make sure that legally their case was solid? Because we know that Roman Abramovich is not afraid to lawyer up if he thinks he's got a case.
I think that's probably an aspect of this. Another aspect is that they have effectively been shamed into taking more action against Russian oligarchs generally by the EU. I think there's been pressure from the US, and of course from public opinion about the situation in Ukraine. We've seen before that that's the way this government tends to operate. They're quite reactive and often behind the curve with these sorts of things. But another key consideration, I think, in all of this is that for all of Abramovich's insistence last week that he had no intention of profiting from a Chelsea sale, clearly the UK government don't want to take him at his word on that. And they don't trust him necessarily to follow through on that or to send the money where he says he's going to. So they have put themselves in position to control the process of a sale. That's what I believe fundamentally this is, because it's the only tenable outcome now, isn't it? Chelsea can't function under sanctions for a long time. And I don't think the government imposed this licence with a view to basically limiting Chelsea for a long time. The plan is for a change of ownership as soon as possible. And I think the UK government are determined that wherever the money goes, that bit doesn't seem to have been fully game planned out yet. It will not be to a bank account that is controlled by Roman Abramovich.
Simon, you were at Carrow Road last night. It strikes me again that we're in the position where Thomas Tuchel and in yesterday's case, Emma Hayes have been left to do all the talking. Was there any chat from anybody at the game that we might hear from the likes of a Granovskaia, a Czech or a Buck, or have they just almost washed their hands of this situation?
Well, that's the thing. We don't know if they've washed their hands of this. We don't see them. It almost feels like Thomas Tuchel's expertise and Emma Hayes in talking about these subjects is almost being taken for granted. They're so good. It's like, oh yeah, let's just keep them because they seem to know the right things to say, not only to their players but to the Chelsea fans tuning in that want to have some reassurance themselves. Tuchel again. Post-match was very reassuring, but also painting the picture that he's basically saying, look, you guys perhaps know more than I do, and I think he's being very honest and genuine in that. As Dom alluded to at the start, there was no sort of like great briefing to him and the players on the way to the game. It was kind of like, get on with it, try and win the game. And that's what Tuchel is kind of focusing on. If anything, the intense fixture list at this moment is a blessed relief from the thoughts that must be going through all their minds about what the future holds for Chelsea. But it's all really well sort of getting the players and Tuchel being able to, and Emma Hayes and the women players being able to focus on these one games. But I think it's going to be harder the longer this draws on for people to be able to sort of put this to the back of their minds.
The reality is that as much as we as members of the media and as Chelsea fans are desperate to hear from the hierarchy and from people further up the food chain than Thomas Tuchel, the suggestion is that Bruce Buck and presumably Marina Granovskaia were presumably talking to the government through most of yesterday, trying to get the licence that was imposed, which was imposed, and Chelsea should be grateful that it was, because the alternative is unthinkable. But they were still trying to get that licence relaxed so that they can function, and those talks were going on yesterday with government officials. And I imagine they'll presumably be extended into today, Friday, in an attempt to make sure that the club can function, because the bottom line is, as we've said before on this podcast, Chelsea make a loss. Chelsea are reliant upon Roman Abramovich to function as a business. Their wage bill is hugely onerous, £333 million in the last financial figures. albeit that number was probably warped slightly by win bonuses because they were so successful in the Champions League. So I think you can probably assume that it's about £25 million a month. Well, they've got to meet payroll. Do Chelsea have the cash reserves, given that any money that they receive, any money, from selling off what remains of their merchandise stock, from any tranches of incoming transfers for sales, if they're due any money on that money is frozen. It's not for them to spend on a day-to-day basis. It's frozen. They are reliant, as it stands, under that licence, on cash reserves. Do they have even £25 million in the bank to pay for the wages for next month? We simply don't know. So I think that's why the club is so anxious to have the licence changed slightly and shifted so that they can make some money. There can be a steady flow of ticket sale money, merchandise money, whatever they can get really, so that they can meet their obligations to payroll, etc.
And just quickly, Matt, just sort of your question about why aren't they speaking, you have to bear in mind, we've never heard from Marina Granovskaia on anything, and I can't remember the last time Bruce spoke to the media on anything either, and perhaps they
particularly since the whole Super League business.
Well, yes, and of course you almost go back to the CPO situation, which was woefully handled. And but yeah, you just sort of think that they won't want certain awkward questions being asked in their direction about their association with Abramovich. So let Thomas Tuchel take centre stage and deal with it all.
Liam, I'll ask you about what's happening with the sponsorship in a minute. But Dom, if you could just lay out, as you did in your piece yesterday, what the impact is on things like ticket sales and the shop being closed and the budget for travel, all the actual whys and wherefores of that, in case anybody missed it yesterday.
Okay, well, under the terms of the licence that's been granted, they cannot make any further ticket sales. So season tickets are fine. I think there are 28,000 season ticket holders, and they've prepaid, so they can continue coming to Chelsea games. But beyond, I think Brentford started selling some tickets for the game at Stamford Bridge in early April at the beginning of this week. So they presumably have made some sales ahead of the licence award on the 10th of March. But they can now no longer sell tickets because that money would go to Chelsea and therefore, by definition, eventually to Roman Abramovich. So all those transactions are done. Chelsea fans may be able to go to away fixtures because those ticket sales will benefit the host clubs. So I imagine that there is a chance that those games will probably sell out even quicker than they have done at the moment. But that's on ticket sales. I mean, we wait to see what happens with the FA Cup. Maybe the FA could sell tickets on Chelsea's behalf or to Chelsea fans, but that money must never go back to the club. Likewise, the Champions League with UEFA, we have no idea on that yet. We're still waiting to see how they address the situation. So that's tickets. With things like travelling to away games, they've been capped at 20 grand for necessary travel. So an away trip, say to Middlesbrough, if that hadn't been prepaid, they would be limited to £20,000. Now, this is a Premier League football club that would normally travel with 21 first-team players, backroom staff, administrative staff, medical staff, security staff, private jets. Either way, you're probably talking 50 personnel, bare minimum. For a domestic return journey, there were suggestions that it would be more like 45 to 50 grand. So clearly that's not going to be possible under the government restrictions. So it's a lot of train journeys. And in fairness, a lot of Premier League clubs travel to away games by train. That's what happens. I mean, the whole notion that Chelsea flew to Norwich yesterday is still a bit baffling in the times that we live in, but there you go. So they can get by with that. They won't be staying in the same luxury hotels that they used to, perhaps, but they'll just have to get used to the new reality. Away travel in Europe, slightly different. 20 grand doesn't get you very far when you're travelling to, say, a Madrid or Munich in the next round of the Champions League, presuming they get past Lille next week. And I imagine that their trip to Lille has already been prepaid and it's all sorted. So there may have to be a bit of leeway given by the government in terms of travel for away games in Europe. And they have indicated that could well be the case. Chelsea cannot receive any transfer fees at the moment. They cannot sign any players at the moment. They cannot renew any contracts at the moment. Basically, everything that's in place at the moment, they can satisfy if they have the cash reserves to do so. So they can, if a next instalment on Romelu Lukaku's deal from Inter is due, they can meet that cost if they have the money to do so. But the whole idea of Antonio Rudiger suddenly getting a new contract worth $300,000 a week is out the window. I would be intrigued to see, and maybe Simon and Liam can fill me in, whether they can even kick in a year extension clause on Cesar Azpilicueta, because technically you're taking on another obligation, and I'm not sure at the moment whether they'd be able to do that. But basically any transaction is frozen. They cannot do anything. Catering at games, $500,000 limits for home games. $500,000 doesn't get you very far, even with only 25 to 28,000 people in the stadium. That's about £18 a head. Now, that's not going to do very much for the prawn sandwich brigade up in the west and the east stands. That's not enough money to cater for them. So everything is going to be downsized. Everything is going to be scaled back, just so that they can function and fulfil their fixtures. I suspect that this licence will shift again. I suspect there will be lots of changes to it to make it more feasible for Chelsea to function as a club. It won't be the same club. It's not going to be the same as it was last week. But I suspect that it's in everybody's interest that they can fulfil their fixtures. They can continue to be a viable business for the near future, for the foreseeable future, until a buyer can be sorted out. And the other thing, of course, with the licence is actually concerns the sale and what happens with that, because under the terms of the current licence, it will be very, 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 very difficult for Chelsea to be sold to a prospective buyer. However, all parties can apply for a separate licence, and this will be the key licence that would allow a sale to go through as long as none of the funds ever landed back with Abramovich. Not a penny has to go to him. So again, that's a process that presumably the government and Chelsea are talking about at the moment to try and get that done. And over all of this, sorry to keep talking, but this is complicated, but overall is what does Abramovich do? Does he fight this legally? Is he outraged at the assertion that he is close to Putin, which is something that he's always railed against? Every media organisation in this country has been served notice that we're not supposed to make that allegation. Now the British government has gone out and made it and feels illegally watertight to do that. Is he going to fight this process? Is he going to fight these sanctions? Because if he does, everything gets drawn out, everything is protracted, and I think then actually the very immediate future of Chelsea's cast under considerable doubt.
Also casting doubt, I guess, Liam, is the fact that the likes of Three have suspended their deal as the club's principal sponsor. We believe that's worth, about £40 million in terms of that deal. These brands are obviously looking to protect themselves, and presumably they can do this without any sort of financial implication to themselves, because there's a kind of good faith agreement that both parties will act in the best interests of one another, and Three and Hyundai and Nike or whoever will say, well, you're not doing that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are often sort of moral type clauses in these commercial deals that give either party an opportunity to take an action like this. I'm generally quite cynical of anything relating to a moral stance when it comes to a corporation, but obviously brands are going to engage in brand protection at times like this, and Three don't want to be associated with Chelsea as long as Roman Abramovich is the owner. Functionally, I don't think it's a massive issue right now, because even if Three were paying Chelsea still, Chelsea couldn't use that money. So it doesn't functionally change how Chelsea will operate under this licence. And they're not ripping up the deal, they're suspending it. As things stand, the only partners of Chelsea who've walked away are Plan International, the charity who've brought forward a deal that was already due to end in May to now, in light of everything that's happened. So if sponsors actually start walking away, that will be a very different issue for Chelsea and something that's far more consequential for the club. And that, of course, is another consideration for what Dom just talked about, which is if Abramovich fights this, this will be one of the ripple effects. I think, one of the many ways in which it would be catastrophic for Chelsea is that, he's already perceived to be toxic. His presence is seen to be toxic, and brands will act accordingly if he tries to stick around and kind of challenge the UK government on this. Chelsea could pay a really high commercial price for it, as much as anything else.
Simon, how big an impact do you think this is going to have on a potential sale? I mean, obviously a massive one, but are people who expressed an interest already sort of negotiating with the government now? Is that what is happening? It seems like people haven't necessarily been put off attempting to buy Chelsea.
No, and understandably so, because you've got a chance of purchasing the European champions, the Club World Cup holders, a team synonymous with great success, potentially on the cheap. Of course, there is the concern about buying a club off Abramovich, but if you're buying off the UK government, that's a different story. There's Rain, the merchant bank that are in charge of the sale, and certainly been sort of heading up the sale, they have paused things for 24, 48 hours, but as far as they're concerned, no one's dropped their interest. In fact, the amount of inquiries they've had are hitting the roof. And like I said, it's no surprise. I mean, this is a remarkable opportunity, despite the circumstances, to own one of the best clubs in Europe. So unsurprisingly, it's garnered loads of interest. And potentially it's going to be even cheaper now than it was a few days ago.